Is the Blob a masterpiece within science fiction, or is it a slimy mess? Find out today on Really Old Movies. Welcome to Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin, and today I'll be discussing the Steve McQueen classic, The Blob from 1958. Some essential movie details. The Blob was released on September 12th of 1958 by Paramount Pictures. It was originally going to be called The Glob, but due to there being a comic strip by Walt Kelly of the same name, it was decided to change the name to The Blob. Now the basic plot. Steve, played by Steve McQueen, and his girlfriend Jane investigate a meteorite crash that happened in the woods near their kissing point. While driving away from the crash site, they encounter an old man who has a mysterious blob-like substance on his arm. They rush him to the hospital, hoping the doctor can help. The doctor calls in a nurse to come help him get the blob off, and when she arrives, the body of the old man has disappeared. They find the blob on the floor because it has consumed the old man and then continues to consume both the doctor and the nurse. Steve returns to the hospital only to find that the doctor has been eaten, so he rushes to the police station to notify them about this, but they don't believe Steve since he's sort of a delinquent and has pulled pranks and practical jokes on them in the past, so they have a hard time believing him. So Steve and Jane go and convince his friends to warn the other townsmen of the blob. The blob gets into a movie theater and starts consuming many of the townspeople, which leads to the air raid alarms to be sounded. And while they're being chased, they're chased into a diner. Steve discovers that the blob's weakness is actually cold substances. So he lets the townsmen know, and they all get fire extinguishers, and they freeze the blob. The Air Force comes and takes the blob and drops it off into the Arctic, with the film ending with the end with a question mark, insinuating that the blob will return. So that's the basic plot. Now, my overall initial thoughts of the plot, I gave it 2 out of 5. I thought it was not that good. It was a very bad plot. I really wanted to like it. This kind of seemed up my alley, but it was really hard to like it. The film starts off with Steve and Jane kissing each other, then a shooting star falls, or the meteorite. So there really isn't much of a setup. We're kind of just thrown into this little town in Pennsylvania. And, not much really happens after that. And unfortunately, the blob, he's just not that scary looking. I think that's mainly due to the budget and due to the special effects of the time. So it really is funny seeing people freak out and be scared about it, but it doesn't look that scary. So yeah, overall though, the plot was not very good. Not that interesting. In regards to acting, I gave it 3 out of 5. It was okay. This is Steve McQueen's first real major role. So he wasn't quite a household name yet. Most of the people in this were kind of nobodies. So it was really strange though, because most of the teenagers were actually full-grown adults. Like McQueen himself, he's 28 when he played the role. So all the teenagers look a lot older than teenagers. So that kind of took me out of it. It was a little strange. And then the actors and actresses that were playing actual adults, they're okay. I think the doctor, he's probably the best character in the film, along with some of the police officers. Not all of them. The one sergeant that Steve McQueen sees when he's driving backwards, that guy's a pretty good actor. So overall, acting's just okay. 3 out of 5. In regards to directing, I gave it a 2 out of 5. I thought it was pretty bad. Some of the scenes were really long, especially whenever we're just sitting around in the town itself. It really could have been trimmed down a bit. And I just think it's odd that your lead star, who's going to be a teenager, he's like 28 years old. It feels weird and doesn't really make much sense to me. But I guess that's something that Hollywood kind of still does today. They hire a lot of adults to play teenagers, which I find A little strange, but it is what it is. Like, they could have easily hired like a 21-year-old, It's not much older than an 18-year-old, for example. But I digress. The directing, it was okay, but it really wasn't that good because of the editing choices, the casting choices, and just a lot of the choices were really strange for this film. Now, in regards to cinematography and special effects, I think this is the best part and highlight of the film. I gave it a 5 out of 5. I love the Blob himself, even though he wasn't that scary looking. It's really interesting seeing him move around and get bigger and all that. I thought that was pretty impressive. And this sounds terrible on paper, but whenever he's consuming people, it's actually really interesting looking. Like, they put a lot of good work and effort into it, especially when he's like consuming the doctor. That it's pretty terrifying, actually. That's probably the scariest part of the whole film. And it was like a half a second. It wasn't very long. But yeah, I think that's the highlight of the film. And but I do think that some of the times when the actors were reacting to the Blob, it was a little silly because it really isn't that scary looking. There's a scene with the nurse when she's like freaking out, and it's like it's not that scary of a creature, but it is what it is. In regards to the music, I gave it a 3 out of 5. I thought the Blob song at the very beginning was pretty funny, and I enjoyed it. But it's also weird considering how the film is, for the most part, trying to be serious. I mean, the dialogue is kind of silly sounding, but they're trying to be serious with it. It's not supposed to be a comedy. So, and I don't typically mind movies that are a little silly, don't take themselves too seriously. Like a lot of the corny Disney movies from the 60s and 70s, like Cat from Outer Space or The Love Bug or The Ugly Dachshund. They're those movies. It makes sense that it's a little silly, not taking itself seriously. But they also had charm to them. This movie, it's trying to take itself seriously, but it has all the corny stuff that you typically have in a funny movie. So to me, it doesn't work very well. And I also thought that the music itself was a bit strange considering how it was supposed to be serious. And it reminds me of how nowadays movie studios, they try to incorporate like hip hop or rap or whatever into kids movies, even though these songs are kind of more adult. This kind of feels almost the opposite. This film seems aimed more towards an older audience, like maybe teenager, young adult age range, and then the music sounds pretty childish. So I don't know what's up with that, but other than that, the music was okay. I really liked this song, but I don't think it fit very well with this kind of serious movie. All right, so overall, that brings my letterbox to a 3 out of 5. And would I recommend it? If you're really into B movies with kind of hokey acting and kind of non-existent plots, all that, you'll probably like this movie. I personally, like I said, I don't mind movies like this, but I don't know. It was just okay. I don't like it very much, but maybe if I see more movies like this, I'll start to like it and appreciate it. But at the time being, I didn't like it very much. So I don't know if I could really recommend it. But like I said, if you really like cheesy movies, like the Disney movies from the 60s and 70s, you'll probably get a kick out of it. Though those ones were trying to be charming and try to be fun. This one really wasn't. So yeah, and keep in mind, it's a pretty slow burner too. It takes a while for things to actually start to happen. I want to say like 20 or 30 minutes in is really when the Blob starts attacking people. So keep that in mind. A lot of setup and, well, I wouldn't say setup, just a lot of things happen that have nothing to do with the film happen. All right, well, those are my thoughts and feelings on The Blob from 1958. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure to subscribe to our Instagram and Facebook at Really Old Movies, where I discuss details about the week's particular film. New episodes of this podcast are released Saturdays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Spotify. All right, well, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This has been Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin. Take care.